Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Secretary Blinken, for gracing us with your presence again. I have actually some questions about the Sudan, but because we have continued to talk about NEO, I will also ask a question on this. So Ambassador Wilson testified to the committee during a transcribed interview about the specified reasoning for why he called the NEO on August 15th, describing the situation that included thousands of Talib fighters streaming directly into Kabul, a flow that contradicted assurances that we had received from the Talibs, and orders that we believed had been given for them to stop by Taliban senior leadership, the expected seizure of 2 prisons later that day, and the release of thousands of inmates. Talib fighters, ISIS fighters, common criminals, and the abandonment oversight of checkpoints into and within Kabul's green zone that were vital to our security. We had been striving to maintain embassy operations in accord with the direction given to us. This was no longer possible. And at that point, I recommended to Secretary Blinken our immediate evacuation. He agreed, and the White House subsequently approved a non-combatant evacuation. The majority has repeatedly pointed to the testimony of military leaders to argue that the State Department waited too long to initiate the NEO. But Ambassador Wilson had a clear rationale for his timing, and that calling for the NEO too soon would have complicated our ability to get out. If we had left earlier, several thousand SIV applicants that we got out in whatever the number of days that you want to talk about would not have been able to leave the country. We would not have been able to provide support to American citizens trying to get out. Our eyes and ears about what was happening around us would have been drastically degraded. Secretary Blinken, would you agree that Ambassador Wilson's testimony reflects a detailed and realistic understanding of the conditions on the ground?
Yes, I would.
Thank you. What would have been the repercussions if the State Department had called a NEO before conditions on the ground warranted one?
Yeah, it would have actually precipitated those very conditions, and it would have made it more difficult for us to get people out, including American citizens. The airport was open until August the 15th. We were trying to avail ourselves and push people out to take commercial flights. It would have made it much more difficult to get SIV-eligible people out of the country, other Afghans at risk. All of that would have been made more difficult by precipitating the very kind of crisis we ultimately saw. And again, I come back to a fundamental proposition, which is that no one, and I say this collectively, this is the State Department, this is the intelligence community, it's the DOD, in terms of the consensus view on where this was going, there was no consensus view that the government, the Afghan forces, were going to collapse. Our military, having worked with them for 20 years, believed that they would stay and fight. They needed to have the sustained support to do that. General McKenzie has said that, including financial and logistic support. We had no indication that the government would fall. The intelligence community didn't see that. We have very remarkable people at the State Department, including those who wrote the so-called descent channel cable, who were very concerned about what would happen after we left in terms of the durability of the government. I read that cable immediately. I responded to it almost immediately, and many of the measures that they called for in the cable were already in train, because what they were focused on was trying to make sure that we got people out of the country, especially the SIVs. And as I've talked about earlier, that's exactly what we were doing, having taken a program that was dead in the water, revived it, and accelerated it dramatically.
Thank you also for just even mentioning the descent cable and the fact that regardless of if you agree with them or not, there is still a space for folks within the State Department to register discontent. I certainly hope that that is a practice that will continue in this next administration. I would now like to ask in the few moments that I have left about the war in the Sudan, which is a catastrophic humanitarian crisis impacting innocent civilians. I think it is a moral outrage. Over 150,000 have been killed, 11 million have been displaced. The evidence of genocide in Darfur is significant, and I believe an official genocide determination against the RSF and allied militia is long overdue. Why has the administration refrained from making a genocide determination, and do you intend to come to a decision about a determination before the end of this year?
First, very quickly, you're right to put a spotlight on Sudan. It's the worst humanitarian situation in the world by far, by orders of magnitude. We're working intensely to try, of course, to bring an end to it, but in the first instance, to get assistance to people who desperately need it. We've made some progress on that in the last few weeks with both the SAF and to a lesser extent with the RSF. But in terms of atrocities, war crimes, genocide, we've been making determinations already about atrocities and war crimes. We're looking at the question of genocide, whether we complete that review in the time that we have. I can't
Trying to be respectful. Gentlelady's time's expired. Let me just, if I could comment, I mean, you did not see it coming. I've heard that over and over. Perhaps we were getting different intelligence briefings, but I certainly saw it coming, and your own employees in the embassy saw it coming when they sent the descent cable to you, a cry for help that Kabul's falling and the embassy will fall soon. And I don't know how you can say that, honestly, sir, with a straight face. The chair recognizes Mr. Heisinger.